My name is Gavin Beatty, and this is my presentation for environmental toxins, THM 305. So, like everyone else, I read Slow Death by Rubber Duck by Rick Smith and Bruce Lowry. Um, so, it goes over which chemicals in our immediate and adjacent environments contribute to a rise in our personal pollution levels and how we can avoid them, or at least mitigate their impact on our well-being and longevity given ordinary behaviors over time. For example, not just the state of a Teflon pan when it first arrives to us and assuming we use it perfectly all the time, but with regular wear and tear and with the understanding that it's not reasonable for improperly washing a Teflon pan to eventually give us cancer or something. So let's start that with Teflon. So Teflon is a PFC, a perfluorinated compound, and PFCs stay in the environment and are toxic and bioaccumulate. It doesn't break down, causes birth defects, hormone disruption, and high cholesterol, cancers, and lung problems. It's important to realize that as much as a product like Teflon can be detrimental to the end user's health over time, it's much more so to the detrimental to the health of the factory workers and the polluted communities in which the factories operate. And those are dotted, well, for Teflon, it's just one place, but for polluting factories, there's always a fallout for the community, pretty much. And even if you're lucky enough to live somewhere free of polluting factories, long enough history of use of toxic chemicals in our individual homes ends up accumulating in our tap water, whether we've detoxed our homes or not. All right, so then we have brominated flame retardant. So that's dibromylpropyl phosphate, and it was added to fabrics and most notably children's pajamas as a fire retardant. It's 100 times more carcinogenic than cigarette smoke, and while they're eventually banned for sale in North America, we just shipped all the extra ones and leftovers overseas, with the rationale that I guess it's okay for foreign children to have cancer, but it's not okay for North American children too. So that's kind of like a sad story that reminds us that just going out of sight and out of mind is not a reasonable or ethical way to deal with our toxic products. Even if we decide that we're too good to use them, we need to extend that to the rest of the world, because eventually it also just makes it back to us. In the same vein, we have mercury. So mercury is a naturally occurring element, and it occurs in the ground. But it doesn't take long to raise the mercury levels in your blood, and that's bad. For example, from the book, a few contaminated fish meals is enough to double your micrograms per liter in your blood. It's particularly troublesome for folks who rely on fish as a staple, or they rely on hunting animals or larger fish who are themselves top of the food chain, because mercury bioaccumulates, and by the time it gets up to the top of the food chain, you're eating hundreds or thousands of times the amount that you would eat in the bottom of the food chain. So, high levels of mercury can result in permanent brain damage, central nervous system disorders, memory loss, heart disease, kidney failure, liver damage, cancer, loss of vision, loss of sensation, and tremors. It's also linked to MS, ADD, and Parkinson's. Many of these outcomes result from mercury dissolving neurons. This is scary stuff. So we see the brunt of the toxins influence borne by the populations in which the polluting industries operate. In this case, the example was Minamata in Japan, which was in the 70s, and so the whole world knew about that. But then even here in Ontario and grassy narrows, up until the last, still ongoing with the fallout from that, but we knew about Minamata, but we still polluted rivers that fed communities with mercury. Not great. Triclosan. Triclosan is antibacterial, and antibacterials are an interesting case in that Their prevalence in society speaks to a prevalence of the mindset that would have us live in a really sanitized environment, and the idea that being antibacterial is always better than not being antibacterial. One of the points they make in the book is that there's no real benefit to a lot of these antibacterial inclusions. They don't actually get rid of bacteria very well. It's certainly not 100%, and it just makes it possible for the bacteria that remain to develop resistance and become superbugs. So don't do it. Let stuff be a little bit dirty sometimes and just wash your hands. All right. Pesticides. Lawns and pesticides. So we were talking about DDT, chlordane, dieldrin, aldrin, and their relatives to DDT, and they require higher and higher doses to be effective against insect populations because with the rapidity at which insect populations reproduce, they pretty easily develop resistance. The effects of lawns and pesticide uses on anywhere, but lawns particularly because we're around all the time, are non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, neurological impairment, asthma, immunosuppressants, birth defects, reproductive problems, and cancers, mostly brain and prostate. We've gotten rid of the cosmetic use of pesticides for the most part in places like Toronto, but agricultural pesticides still in the long term work their way into our waterways, into our bodies. I looked at my own cabinet, and I had Listerine Ultra Clean, I had Tom's of Maine Simply White toothpaste, and I had Gillette shaving cream. So the other stuff was fine, organic-y, natural stuff. The problem with my Listerine Ultra Clean, it has thymol, which is a pesticide in it, benzoic acid, which being irritant, it had green 3, which is banned in Europe for having been tumorigenic and mutagenic, and also had poloxamer 407 that exhibits possible renal toxicity. To replace that, I made this mouthwash right here, and it's 2 teaspoons baking soda, 2 teaspoons salt, and 2 cups of good old H2O distilled. Works great. Doesn't taste quite as great, but that's fine. I know that I'm not giving myself problems. I had Tom's of Maine Simply White toothpaste. It was pretty good. The thing it had in it was just like aroma without any description of what the aroma was. And last but not least, the Gillette. It also had green 3, so I was doubling down on the green 3. Got rid of that. And it also had something called PEG 23M. And the problem with that is in its manufacture is often contaminated with an ethylene oxide and 1,4-dioxane, which are carcinogenic. And PEG itself shows some evidence of genotoxicity, and it's bad, especially if it gets in through broken skin, which is kind of likely if you ever nick yourself shaving. I'm sorry I went a little over time, but third take, it's as fast as it went. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.